Anyway, on the subject vaguely of pipeweed, we're going to talk about the Shire tonight because we're doing Trouble in Tuckborough. And I wanted to just start with some kind of general discussion of the Shire because we haven't done any general discussion of the Shire. And the first thing that I would want to point out, because I don't know how many of you have actually taken the time to compare the LOTRO Shire map with Tolkien's own Shire map. And although the proportions are different, if you want to look for it, the Shire map is actually a little bit tricky to find because it's not located with the other maps, which are all generally in the back of the Fellowship of the Ring in most editions. The Shire map can usually be found right before the beginning of Book 1, at the end of the Concerning Hobbits prologue of the Fellowship of the Ring. That's where you see the detailed Shire map. And and the thing that you will certainly notice is, if you're familiar with the LOTRO Shire, is that LOTRO has made up no names at all in absolutely everything. Okay, except for the Shire homesteads. Apart from the Shire homesteads, absolutely everything in the game is mentioned on the Shire map. There are a few things on the Shire map that I don't think are in the game, but the opposite is not true. So, everything from Needlehole and the Rushik Bog and Bridgefields and the Green Hill country, which might seem like that's one of the ones that if you're just coming at it in game, you kind of walk through from Tuckborough and you're like, Green Hill country, that's a little bit strange. Like, why is this called Green Hill country? Well, Tolkien called it that. That's why it's called Green Hill country. And Overhill and Brockenborings and Skerry. Even there's even the quarry at Skerry is even on the map, specifically in the position that it's in. Off to the east of Skerry there, by the place where that loop of the road turns to the west. So again, as in so many things, they've stuck very close to the books, and it's just a really remarkable thing. By the way, one thing that I realized, and you guys who are more familiar with the game can help me with this. One thing that I've never found, but I can't imagine they left out, but I forgot to look for it. I have forgotten to look for it, I should say, in my jaunts around the Shire in game. Do they have the Three of Farthing Stone anywhere?
Oh yes.
Yes.
Yes, it's one of those landmarks for landmarks of the Shire. You can earn a deed for finding it.
Okay. See, I haven't done my completionist thing in the Shire yet.
Near the Methil stage.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, I mean, it was one of those things that I knew, like, obviously they would not leave it out. I have my faith in the attention to detail of the LOTRO designer so far is so great that I was trusting it existed, but I haven't seen it yet. So that's cool. But anyway, so again, it's just, I find it another really remarkable example of how closely they have stuck to all the details. I mean, in general, the rule that I have found when playing LOTRO is that if there is a detail that is mentioned in the book, it will be in the game somewhere. They add stuff, but they very, very rarely omit things and leave out details that are included in the book. And if ever they make alterations, they seem to have, they seem to do it for some pretty clear reasons. Some general things that I want to talk about the Shire. I think that the way that they do the Shire is really fascinating. I mean, I think that they have done such an interesting job of really pegging the Shire culture, especially not only in the way that visually, I think that their visuals in the Shire are really wonderful, but even thinking of the quest lines, I really like, for two reasons. I really like, those two cornerstones of Hobbit questing life. Of course, the mail delivery quests and the pie returning quests. The mail line and the pie line are really just wonderful, and there are two things that I really like about them. I think that they in two ways capture a lot of the spirit of the Shire as Tolkien represented it, especially in the early chapters of the Fellowship of the Ring, and that is, first, the fact that these comparatively minor things seem like a really big deal to the hobbits, right? You know, so the idea that like a major quest that you would go on would be like helping to deliver the mail. You know, there's really kind of something in that. I love the fact that you start off at Little Delving, at this little tiny place, and you go into Mickle Delving, which just seems, you know, huge here, this big metropolis we're currently standing in here now. You know, and then you're sent, you know, to travel around the whole Shire. Remember what a big deal that was. Remember how Sam Gamgee has never gone more than 20 miles from his home. You know, he'd never been as far as Woodall in his life. You know, from Hobbiton. Mickle Delving here is actually pretty far. It's literally off the map that Tolkien drew in the beginning of the book. But anyway, it's again, I think that the way that these little things are sort of made into, you know, and the whole crisis of you know, the spoiled pies, right? You know, that like we must turn and reclaim the pies. And I love the fact that other hobbits are talking about it. Like when you wander around the Shire, you'll meet like random hobbits on the street who will say something like, "There's something kind of weird about those pies that have been coming out of Hobbiton lately." You know, it's like the scandal is spreading around the Shire already.
I love the Marxist Hobbit, the training hall, who talks about how the proletariat are taking all the best pies for
all the best pie fillings. Yes.
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 Yeah. No, the bourgeois are taking the best pies, and the proletariat get none of the pies. I'm just saying that.
Yeah, I mean, just that whole idea of like that, because I mean, hobbits are really gossipy. I mean, we know this. You know, this is one of the things that we see about them, and so again, there's so many ways in which, you know, I mean, as it is, many of the quest lines, you know, and this is something, you know, I've mentioned before, and is sort of an obvious challenge to the whole enterprise of doing a Tolkien video game, is the fact that, you know, in our modern culture anyway, it's pretty much impossible to design a video game which is not primarily focused on combat. And, you know, a storyline which is primarily combat based is one that is just going to be really hard to make that work in Tolkien's world. It's just, of course, not how Tolkien's world, and especially the Shire, works. And they do. I think they do a pretty good job of the way that they do that. I mean, I think that they work pretty hard to sort of try to make it fit the spirit and the tone, but it doesn't really. It fits even less well in the Shire, and so I find it really interesting that in the Shire they've gone so far out of their way to create these really quite, you know, entirely non-combat oriented quest lines that you do. But there's more to those quest lines that I think are really interesting, because they capture another element of hobbits, which is something I think people don't really talk about enough, or don't really think about enough. Often readers, you know, Tolkien fans will talk about the Shire and about hobbits as if hobbits and hobbit life is all like idyllic, right? Like you've got the hobbits and they're always happy, and everyone is peaceful, and everyone is pleased except for those who had to cut the grass, you know, like that's like the standard life of hobbits. But that's like when you actually look at it, I mean, go back and reread chapter 1 of the Fellowship of the Ring. Like one of the things that you see is that hobbits are really pretty venial. I mean, like they're not wicked people. They don't get into fights. They're not really quarrelsome in any, and they're not violent. But they're not entirely honest either. I mean, you go through and you see the way in which, like, it's like a matter of routine that some of the members of the party, some of the people invited to the party, to Bilbo's party, when he's handing out presents, sneak out the back and come back in line so as to nick a second present. Like that's like a matter of routine. That, like, granted, they're gonna like sort of cheat. And I remember even as a kid, I was kind of appalled by that. I was like, and Bilbo let them get away with that? Like, oh man, that's disgusting. Like trying to take advantage of Bilbo that way after he's invited them, and
And they were just kind of like, oh, that's just Uncle Fuzzy Oddfoot. He does that.
Right, exactly. And that's very much the tone. It doesn't seem to be in any way unusual or noteworthy. It's just like, granted, they're going to behave that way. Similarly, the next morning, after Bilbo's departure, and Frodo is giving out the gifts. Remember, there's all that business with, not just, young Sancho Proudfoot, whom Frodo has to literally beat into submission before he can get him out of Bag End, where he's trying to he's trying to make an excavation in one of the. So he takes it upon himself to go and start digging into the walls of the pantry where he thinks he can find gold. And then you've got them ripping the labels off of other people's presents and walking off with anything that wasn't nailed down. And Frodo and his friends are constantly having to turf people out who are stealing things. I mean, the whole thing is a mess. And these hobbits are not strictly virtuous at all. They're the opposite of that. And again, I think it's an element of Hobbit culture that people tend to overlook. That they might be good people in a general sense, but when it comes to the finer points of morality, they're not even. And even Bilbo's gifts. The presents and the notes that he leaves to people, some of them are really kind of mean-spirited, I mean, they're funny and everything, but in particular, I mean, leaving the empty bookcase for the guy who, borrowed so many of his books and didn't return them, that seems perfectly fair. The gift of the umbrella to the guy who had walked off with a whole bunch of his and never returned them, okay, that seems all in good fun. I've never been quite sure what to make of him giving a waste paper basket to his old aunt, who has written reams of good advice for decades.
That's where she can cram her good advice.
Well, that's one possible implication of the thing, right? It's so, Auntie, I never could bear to tell you this, but here's where I've been putting all that advice you've been sending me over the years. That's probably not what Bilbo meant, but that invitation is out there. It's certainly possible. And then there's there's of course the convex mirror that Angelica Baggins gets, which is supposed to be a kind of reproof, right? But anyways, and again, the point is these are funny, but it's a little mean, especially the one to his aunt. I mean, maybe she's maybe she's horrible and everything and richly deserves it, but I don't know.
I always thought the town. Go for it. Sorry.
Oh, I was going to say, I think, in my mind, I think that Tolkien was just trying to exaggerate the best and worst that he had seen and experienced in provincial British countryside town.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Yeah, exactly. But the worst as well. And again, it's the thing that people, so many Tolkien fans, very understandably, very rightly, love the Shire and love the idea of and we'll talk a lot about Tolkien's love for the simple life and how idealized the hobbits in the Shire are, and it's kind of true, but it's not nearly as idealized as most people kind of make out. Even think of the way they carry on at the party, right? I mean, Bilbo stands up, after, and they've been feasting at his house for hours and hours, and he says, "I hope you're all enjoying yourselves as much as I am." And there are some of the people who shout, "No!" Right? I mean, now, I can imagine that in a good-spirited way, right? That is to say, if they're teasing Bilbo. Right, they're teasing Bilbo for what a good time he's obviously having, right? Especially if they think, maybe he's been, maybe he's had a few too many, and they're like, "No, we're obviously not having as much fun as you are." Ha ha ha!
I figured it was the tweens.
Right. I can totally see that. But again, I mean, just the whole thing, the spirit of the culture is just not as universally friendly and honest and cheerful as people tend to think. And so I like the fact that has been kind of captured in those pie and mail quests. The fact that you have those nosy and hungry hobbits that are going to, you've got to avoid the nosy hobbits who are going to, I don't know what they're supposed to have done. Are they supposed to
take your mail? They walk up and take
rip
your mail.
the mail bag out of your hands and run off
Right through it.
in order to open other people's mail. That might seem a little shocking, but actually, in context, it kind of seems like exactly what some hobbits might in fact be expected to do. And so I really admire the fact that these central LOTRO Shire quests have really kind of captured that particular element of Hobbit life too. And of course, it is really comical, right? As A.F. Arthur says, I never have any sympathy for the hungry hobbits who take my spoiled pies. That's part of the joke, right? Is that these hungry hobbits who will who will catch you running down the road with a pie and run away with it themselves and eat it. And of course, ironically, this will be their undoing, right? Because the pie is spoiled. So they shall reap the due rewards of their iniquity. So in this way, the hungry hobbits, I guess, are a little bit like Gollum. Not much, maybe, but it's kind of the same, except not quite as severe. But
They're
anyway,
for what they can get.
yeah, exactly. They're all for what they can get, and then the thing that they desire ends up being maybe not their destruction, but their discomfiture anyway. For these reasons, I am a big admirer of the pie and mail quests, though I confess I have never yet finished them. The only time I've played the Shire, by the way, the only Hobbit character I've ever played is the character that my 6-year-old son made. So he and I play it together. And my 6-year-old son is not quite patient enough to be as much of a completionist as I am. So we have not, in fact, completed all the pie and mail quests. Someday I'm going to start my own Hobbit character, and that will be the day when the mail gets delivered, I promise. But anyway, it's and that's been a lot of fun. Yes, my son has a Hobbit minstrel, which his instrument of choice is a drum. My 6-year-old plays the drum and absolutely loves the fact that as these wolves are bearing down on you, you're standing there frantically playing your drum at it. He finds this quite delightful. They're not nearly so entertaining as the cries, which just, he laughed so hard the first time that, the Hobbit just went, "Wah!" And the wolf just not only dropped dead, but dropped dead in the midst of a circle of scorched earth. Oh, man, he just cracked up. Anyway, Hobbit Minstrel's pretty awesome. So tonight we're going to do Trouble at Tuckborough, and in Trouble at Tuckborough we get into basically the beginnings of the Scouring of the Shire plot. It's one of the things that I really like about the skirmishes and the way the skirmishes are set up, is that skirmishes have the way that they integrate into the chronology of the story, right? So, when you're in Bree, right after, most of the time most people spend in Bree is, while Aragorn is still there in the Prancing Pony. Right? You're going back in to check in with Aragorn for most of the time. So you're still in the early stages of the quest, and so you've got Bill Ferny, and you've got the Squint-Eyed Southerner, and you've got some of that activity, growing already. But through the skirmishes, they're able to kind of advance the clock and bring us forward to some things that are going to happen, back in Bree and the Shire, while the sort of the flow of the epic quests in the game is moving on, following the Fellowship through ultimately towards Rohan and Gondor. So here in the Shire, we start to touch on they've done in Trouble in Tuckborough, this sort of classic example of what they do so well in LOTRO, which is take an event which seems like it would be really cool, but which it doesn't happen on screen, it doesn't happen during the main plot of The Lord of the Rings, but is just alluded to. And that is the sort of the siege of Tuckborough, right? We know that the Thane, that Thane paladin, fought against the brigands, that the Tooks rebelled against them, and that the brigands tried to overwhelm them, but the Tooks holed up in their holes in the Great Smiles at Tuckborough, and have been basically sort of living a life of guerrilla resistance until the travelers return to lead the scouring of the Shire. So I think that it's really cool to sort of see how that is integrated. I guess we're going to get. I haven't done this skirmish myself, so I've only read about it. But I do think that not guerrilla with a
no. But also, we had Bainrez saying Sharky's pie would be a pie of many colors.
Oh, right.
A pie of many flavors.
A pie of many flavors.
Pie of many fairies, perhaps.
Get rid of those tripumple cakes with the pies inside the cake and stuff.
So what you're saying is that the spoiled pie quest is really a foreshadowing.
There you go. There you go.
No, it's a bloody nuisance.
Right. Yeah, no, that makes sense. Anyway, so I'm looking forward to Trouble in Tuckborough, and it's as Chris Pearson said at Mythmoot, he is hoping to come back after Gondor and Mordor, to come back and to do the scouring of the Shire, and he made a point, something which I hadn't ever really thought about before. He said, his goal is to have LOTRO be the first Tolkien adaptation ever to do the scouring of the Shire. Everyone has skipped it. No one has ever depicted the scouring of the Shire.
Well, actually, the radio drama did.
Yes.
No one has ever visually depicted.
Visually depicted.
Okay,
it,
visually.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Well, because the radio drama is more just of a, because it is an adaptation, so it does count, I suppose. But yes, visual adaptation. But anyway, so that would be really cool. But for now we have the Trouble in Tuckborough as at least the sort of initial stages, or really the only thing that was described in the book as any event of any excitement. That is the fight between the Tooks and the brigands prior to the eventual scouring.